There's a moment that happens to all of us, I think. A moment when you realize that the person you've been looking for wasn't hiding in some grand revelation or romantic movie scene. They were just there, waiting. Not for you to be perfect, but for you to be ready. For me, that person was Benny Blanco. I know what you're thinking. You've seen the headlines, the Instagram posts, the comment sections that turned into battlegrounds. You think you know this story, but you don't. Not really, because the truth isn't what happened in public. It's what happened in the silence between takes, in the studio at 3 in the morning, in the messages I typed and deleted 100 times before finally pressing send. This isn't a story about a pop star and a producer. It's a story about two people who spent years building something so quietly that even they didn't realize what it was until it was too late to pretend otherwise. I met Benny years ago, back when I was still trying to figure out who I was beyond the Disney girl, beyond the tabloid narratives, beyond the version of myself I'd been selling since I was a kid. He walked into a session at a studio in West Hollywood wearing a hoodie that looked like it had survived a decade of coffee spills and late nights. He didn't treat me like Selena Gomez. He treated me like someone who was there to make music. And honestly, that was the first time in years anyone had done that. We worked together on and off for a while. He'd send me beats at random hours. I'd send back voice memos recorded in my kitchen or my car. It was easy, effortless, the kind of creative partnership where you don't have to explain yourself because the other person just gets it. But somewhere along the way, it became more than that. I didn't notice it at first, or maybe I did and I just wasn't ready to admit it, because admitting it meant risking something I couldn't afford to lose. My life had been so public, so dissected, so criticized for so long that the idea of letting someone in, really in, felt like standing at the edge of a cliff with no idea how far the drop was. Benny never pushed. He never asked for more than I could give. And maybe that's why eventually I wanted to give him everything. This story starts in a studio. It always does. But it doesn't end there. It ends with a choice. And the hardest part about that choice wasn't deciding if I loved him. It was deciding if I was brave enough to let myself be loved. So here it is, the truth, the whole truth. Not the version the internet made up, not the one that my publicist would craft, not the one that fits neatly into an Instagram caption. Just what happened and why it mattered. The panic attacks always came at night. I don't know why. Maybe because that's when the world gets quiet enough that you can't ignore the noise in your own head. Maybe because darkness has a way of making everything feel bigger than it is. Or maybe it's just that my brain liked to wait until I was alone to remind me of every mistake I'd ever made, every headline I couldn't control, every person who expected me to be something I wasn't sure I could be anymore. It was late October. I was in the middle of working on new music, which for me always meant spending weeks inside studios across LA, bouncing between sessions, trying to find something that felt honest. I'd been in West Hollywood that night, tracking vocals for a song I wasn't even sure I liked yet. Most of the team had left by midnight, but I stayed. I always stayed. Benny was still there too. He'd been messing with some production in the other room, layering sounds, tweaking frequencies, doing that thing he does where he disappears into the music and forgets the rest of the world exists. I was sitting on the couch in the vocal booth, staring at my phone, watching my chest tighten in that familiar way that meant I had maybe 10 minutes before the full spiral hit. My hands were shaking, my throat felt like it was closing, and the worst part, I didn't even know what triggered it. It just happened. I tried to breathe through it. I'd done this 1,000 times before, but that night, for some reason, it wasn't working. That's when Benny walked in. He didn't say anything at first. He just stood in the doorway holding 2 iced coffees from the 7-Eleven down on Santa Monica Boulevard, looking at me with those quiet, knowing eyes that never felt like they were judging, only seeing. "You good?" he asked. I nodded, which was a lie, and he knew it. He set the coffees down on the console and sat next to me on the couch.
Not too close, not invading my space, just there. "You don't have to talk about it," he said, "but I'm not leaving." And he didn't. For the next hour, Benny just sat with me. He didn't try to fix me. He didn't ask what was wrong. He didn't tell me to breathe or think positive or any of the things people say when they don't know what else to do. He just existed beside me, solid and steady, until the shaking stopped and my breath evened out and the weight on my chest lifted enough that I could think clearly again. At some point, he put his hand on mine. Not romantic, not calculated, just human. "You know what I think?" he said quietly. "What?" "I think you've been carrying shit that was never yours to carry, and I think you're tired." I looked at him, really looked at him. And for the first time in years, I felt like someone saw me. Not Selena Gomez, the brand, not the girl who'd been in the tabloids since she was 16, not the person everyone had an opinion about. Just me. "Yeah, I'm really tired," I whispered. He squeezed my hand. "Then stop. Just for tonight. You don't have to be anything right now." Something cracked open in me in that moment. Something I'd been keeping locked for so long I'd forgotten it was even there. I leaned my head on his shoulder. He didn't move. We just sat there in the dim light of the studio, surrounded by cables and microphones and half-finished songs. And for the first time in months, I felt safe. I didn't know it then, but that was the moment everything changed. Not because of what happened, but because of what didn't. Benny could have made it about him. He could have used my vulnerability as an opening, but he didn't. He just stayed. And that's when I started to understand that maybe, just maybe, this person was different. We didn't talk about it afterward. The next morning we went back to work like nothing had happened. But something had shifted. I started staying later at sessions when I knew he'd be there. I started texting him about things that had nothing to do with music. And he started showing up in ways that felt less like a work friendship and more like something else. Neither of us said it out loud, but we both knew. The safest place I'd ever found wasn't a city or a stage or a home. It was a studio, and the person waiting on the other side of every broken moment was Benny Blanco.
For months, we lived in the in-between. That's the only way I know how to describe it. We weren't just friends anymore, but we weren't anything else either. We existed in this strange, undefined space where everything felt heavy with meaning, but nothing was ever said out loud. I'd be at home in my house in the hills, and my phone would light up with a text from him at 2 in the morning. Sometimes it was a song. Sometimes it was a meme. Sometimes it was just, "You awake?" And I always was. We'd text for hours about music, about LA, about how weird it was that you could live in a city of 4 million people and still feel completely alone. He told me about growing up in Virginia, about how he'd spent his whole childhood in his bedroom making beats on a computer his mom bought him from Best Buy. I told him about what it was like to grow up on camera, to have your adolescence packaged and sold, to wonder if anyone would ever see you as more than a product. He never made me feel like I was complaining. He just listened. But here's the thing. I started writing messages I never sent. I typed them out late at night, lying in bed with my thumb hovering over the send button, and then I'd delete them over and over again. "I think I'm scared of how much I need you." Delete. "I don't know how to do this without ruining it." Delete. "What if you're the person I've been looking for and I mess it up like I always do?" Delete. I found out later he was doing the same thing. One night in December, we were back in the studio. It was just the two of us again, working on a track that wasn't for any project, just for us. He was at the board adjusting levels, and I was on the couch scribbling lyrics in a notebook, and everything felt so comfortable, so natural, that I almost didn't notice when he went quiet. I looked up. He was staring at his phone. "What's wrong?" I asked. He hesitated.
Then he turned his phone toward me. On the screen was a draft message. To me, unsent. I don't know how to tell you this without changing everything, but I think about you all the time. And I don't mean like a friend. My heart stopped. He pulled the phone back, looking embarrassed. Sorry, I didn't mean for you to see that. Benny. Forget it, it's fine, I'm fine. Benny, look at me. He did. And I could see it in his eyes. The fear. The hope. The exact same thing I'd been carrying around for months. I picked up my phone and opened my own drafts folder. I scrolled through the dozens of unsent messages, some from weeks ago, some from that very morning, and I handed it to him, without saying a word. He read them. All of them. When he looked up, his expression was something I'd never seen before. Soft, vulnerable, completely unguarded. "So we're both idiots," he said quietly. I laughed, a real laugh, the kind that shakes your whole body and makes your eyes water. "Yeah, we really are." He set my phone down on the console and stood up. I stood too, and for a moment we just looked at each other across the small space of that studio, years of unspoken things sitting heavy in the air between us. I don't know how to do this. Me neither. What if it ruins everything? What if it doesn't? That's when he kissed me. It wasn't some big cinematic moment. It was clumsy and tentative and tasted like the cold brew he had been drinking all night. But it was real. More real than anything I'd felt in years. When we pulled apart, I was crying. Not sad tears, just release. "I've been so scared," I whispered. "Me too." And just like that, the in-between was over. We didn't tell anyone. Not yet. We wanted to keep it ours for a little while longer, to figure out what this was without the world weighing in on it. For the next few months, we existed in our own little bubble. Late-night dinners at quiet places in Los Feliz. Drives up the coast to Malibu where no one knew us. Mornings at his place in the valley, making pancakes and pretending we weren't about to upend everything. It was the happiest I'd been in years. But I also knew it couldn't last like this, because eventually the world would find out. And when it did, everything would change. Enjoying the story? Hit the like button, subscribe, drop your comment, and turn on the notifications. Let's keep going. It started with a photo. We'd been careful, so careful. But one night in April, we were leaving a restaurant in Silver Lake, and someone with a camera caught us holding hands as we walked to his car. By the next morning, it was everywhere. TMZ, People, Twitter, TikTok, Instagram comments on every post I'd made in the last 5 years. The headlines ranged from curious to cruel. Selena Gomez dating producer Benny Blanco? Fans react to Selena's new relationship, and they're not happy. Is this a PR stunt? I knew it would happen. I had been in the public eye long enough to know that nothing stays private forever, but knowing it and living through it are two completely different things. The comments were brutal. People questioned everything. My taste, his appearance, whether he was quote-unquote good enough for me, whether I was with him for his connections, whether he was with me for clout. Strangers who'd never met either of us suddenly had PhDs in our relationship. I tried to ignore it. I really did. But it was everywhere. My team was fielding calls, my family was worried, and Benny, who'd spent his whole career behind the scenes, who'd never had to deal with this kind of scrutiny, started pulling away. Not because he stopped loving me, but because he thought he was protecting me. We started fighting. Little things at first. Missed calls, canceled plans, then bigger things. He stopped coming to sessions, I stopped texting, and one night in May, after a particularly bad argument in his car outside my house, he said the thing I had been terrified he'd say. maybe we should take a break. A break? Just until things calm down, until we can figure out how to do this without it destroying everything. I wanted to scream. I wanted to tell him that taking a break was just a coward's way of ending things without having to say the words. But I didn't, because part of me wondered if he was right. Okay, I said quietly, if that's what you want. It's not what I want. It's what I think we need. I got out of the car and walked inside without looking back. And that was it. We didn't talk for 6 weeks. Those were the longest 6 weeks of my life. I threw myself into work, into friends, into anything that would keep me from thinking about him. But it didn't help, because everywhere I went, I was reminded of what I'd lost. The worst part? I knew he was hurting too. I'd see his name pop up on my phone sometimes late at night, and I knew he was staring at his screen the same way I was, wanting to reach out but not knowing how. It wasn't until mid-June that everything changed. I got a call from my manager. Benny had reached out to her asking if he could leave something at the studio where we'd first worked together. She didn't know what it was, but she said he seemed different, quieter, almost desperate. I went to the studio the next day. On the piano, there was an envelope with my name on it. Inside was a letter. I stood there in that studio for a long time, holding the letter in my hands, reading the words over and over until they blurred. The letter wasn't long. It wasn't poetic or dramatic. It was just Benny, in his own words, being completely honest for maybe the first time since everything fell apart. He wrote about the night we first met, about how he'd thought I was talented but guarded, and how over the years he'd watched me rebuild myself piece by piece. He wrote about the night I had the panic attack, and how sitting with me in the silence was the moment he realized he didn't just care about me, he needed me in his life in a way that scared him. He wrote about how the world finding out had broken something in him, not because he was ashamed, but because he didn't know how to protect me from it, and how pulling away was the biggest mistake he'd ever made, because all it did was prove to him that running doesn't fix anything. The last line of the letter is the one I'll never forget. I don't need you to be perfect, Sel. I just need you to be you. And I need to be brave enough to stand next to you while the world watches, if you'll let me. I sat down at the piano and cried. Not because it was sad, but because it was true. I texted him from the studio. I'm here. Where are you? He replied in seconds. On my way. When he walked through the door 20 minutes later, I didn't say anything. I just stood up and walked over to him, and he wrapped his arms around me, and we stayed like that for a long time. He whispered into my hair, I'm sorry. Me too. I don't want to run anymore. Then don't. We didn't fix everything that day. Healing doesn't work like that. But we decided to try again, together. And this time, we weren't hiding. We weren't pretending. We were just two people who'd found something real in the middle of the chaos and decided it was worth fighting for. The internet still has opinions. It always will. But here's what I've learned. You can't build a life based on what strangers think. You can only build it on what's true. And the truth is this. Benny didn't save me. I didn't save him. We just chose each other, over and over again, even when it was hard. Especially when it was hard. There's a Paulo Coelho quote I love. He said, when we love, we always strive to become better than we are. I think about that a lot now. Because loving Benny didn't make me perfect. It made me braver. It made me softer. It made me realize that the strongest thing you can do isn't protecting yourself from pain. It's letting someone in anyway. If you're reading this, maybe you're in your own in-between right now. Maybe you're scared of what it means to let someone see you. Maybe you're wondering if love is worth the risk when the world is so loud and so cruel and so ready to tear things apart. I can't tell you what to do, but I can tell you this. The safest place I ever found wasn't where I expected it to be. It was in the middle of uncertainty, in a studio at 3 in the morning with someone who didn't need me to be anything other than myself. And that's worth everything. So if you find that person, the one who sits with you in the silence, who sees you when you're falling apart, who chooses you even when it's complicated, don't let fear win. Choose them back. The world will talk. It always will. But love, real love, that's the only thing that ever really mattered anyway. If you watched until here, thank you. Tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I love reading your messages. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notifications so you never miss another story like this. And if you'd like to support the channel, you can buy me a coffee. Any amount helps a lot. Link in the pinned comment.